This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we'll show you how to go from employee truck driver to savvy business owner. And we'll do it together because we're starting our own trucking company, Haulin Assets, so you'll get a front row seat through the whole process. Together with some experts in the field, we'll teach you how to set up a business, buy a truck, get your DOT and MC numbers, get insurance, and a lot more. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody, to episode 28. I am Craig, your host for the Haulin Assets podcast, and with me, as always, is the actual expert, Chris. How's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Craig?
It's all right. It's been a long day, but we're going to finish it out with some nice podcasting. I'm really actually looking forward to it. So now this episode, Chris, another month has gone by, and we're going to be covering financials in this episode. Do you want to give us a quick spoiler before we get to the housekeeping stuff?
Yeah, sure. It's October was not too bad of a month. Not our best month, but better than some of the months we've had recently. So I'm pretty happy.
Well, that's good. I mean, seems like it's it's been a lot of unexpected bad news and difficulties on the road and that sort of thing. So it's nice to hear that it's maybe picking up a little bit.
Yeah, it hasn't been a perfect month in that regard, but a step in the right direction, and so. We'll get into that as we go on.
All right. Well, we'll take what we can get. So I do want to remind everybody, Chris, that they can go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com to access the full show notes and past episodes. As you have remarked, and I think it's a good thing to mention every once in a while, these episodes really kind of are meant to be consumed front to back. So start with episode 1 and catch up to us if you haven't done so, because there's we're trying to tell the story of what it's like to start a trucking company, and Chris, you're out there doing it, and so I think it's going to be really fascinating for people if they start from the beginning, right?
Yeah, definitely. You can, even most of the episodes, I mean, you can really listen to on as itself on its own, standalone, but the podcast in itself is really meant to be listened to in order from the beginning, so you kind of get a better picture of the entire story. Yeah,
absolutely. So, Chris, now that we've got some of that out of the way, got to ask you, as usual, what's happening on the road? How are things going out there?
For the most part, things have been going pretty smooth the last week. I do have a little bit of a follow-up to last week's episode on the Don't Get Screwed by the Brokers.
That sounds ominous. Okay.
Yeah, it actually starts out, if you remember, a couple weeks ago. This is like the story that just doesn't end, because we talked a little bit about it in the last episode, and I told the entire story 2 episodes ago. But you remember the story of the load that I had 3 picks, so I had to pick up at 3 different locations. I get to the 3rd location. You remember what happened there?
Yeah, the weight distribution was wrong, and they had to, or they refused to unload you or something, right?
Yeah, so anyway, the 3rd pickup decided, you know what, because you can't get the right weights on your tandems, we're not going to have you take this entire section of the load. And so I'd called to the broker, and the broker authorized it and said, okay, go ahead and just leave, deliver the rest of the load, and you'll be good.
Okay, so far so good.
So anyway, this week, my factoring company, I Thrive Funding, was doing a little bit of follow-up on it and, requesting payment. And come to behold, the broker says, well, the driver just left the facility without getting loaded, without any authorization. Kind of gave him a runaround, said, hey, we're not sure that we're going to pay this load. And, that kind of freaks you out a little bit.
I'll say.
So anyway, Jake, my dispatcher, he gets involved in the whole situation again, and is, he's kind of funny. He gets kind of hot under the collar when things like that happen, which is really good to have because he kind of bulldogs it. And anyway, Jake's super smart. He's been doing this for a long time. He records all of the phone calls that he makes, and so he is the one that actually called the broker, got the authorization, has the recording of that conversation. And we are going to, and the broker said, well, okay, if that's the case, the account manager that we were talking to said, okay, if that's the case, send me the audio file. So Jake's done that, and it sounds like that's going to resolve it. But still, it shouldn't have to come to that. I mean, I think we're going to be safe, but we'll find out for sure when the check comes in the mail.
So let me see if I've got the timeline right here. The Jake, your dispatcher, calls the broker and says, "Hey, here's the situation," and the broker says, "I've got everything handled. Tell Chris he can go." So you go, and then what? The broker was lying through their teeth.
The broker's Coyote, which is a pretty big brokerage. I think if I remember right, they're actually owned by UPS.
Okay.
And the way that they work their loads are kind of funny because like a million different people have their hands on that same load. So you've got an account manager, you've got a sales rep, you've got their just kind of regular dispatchers within Coyote. And nobody really wants to take accountability for kind of what happened because it's not really one person's end all be all on that load. And so just being hopped around from one person to the next, one person says, yeah, you're good. Another person says, no, you're not. And it was late at night. It was like 11 o'clock at night. So when we were talking on the phone and trying to get it all resolved, it was kind of the night crew that was handling things at that point. And they're the ones who actually gave the authorization to leave. But, obviously still it's a Coyote rep and we should be able to go off of what they say. And so when the salesperson kind of, I think, got a hold of what happened, they're the one that's kind of pitching a fit. And, if we couldn't prove that we had actually been told by somebody at Coyote that we were okay to go, then we probably would have been in trouble. But because we've got that audio file that we can show that we had, in fact, despite what they say, have been told we can go, we should be safe. And the moral of this story and the lesson learned is don't trust what a broker says verbally. If they tell you to do something and it's one of those things that's going to affect your pay, it's going to affect your ability to arrive on time, or anything like that could have negative consequences to you, get it in writing. Or if you're like Jake, record the phone call. That's easy. Some people don't necessarily have that set up like he does, but one way or another, you've got to be able to provide them proof that they did say what they said. It's like any business transaction, get it in writing.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. So the other possible moral to this story, and I want you to tell me if this tracks with your experience, but it kind of sounds like, I'm sure that there are benefits to going with to having a large brokerage and, the giant bureaucracy that comes with that. And but I wonder if this is an argument in favor of smaller brokers where, if you can cultivate relationships with smaller brokers where you can understand who it is that you're dealing with, and it's not just, night rep number 287B. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with that. I mean, that's definitely one of the downsides of working with a bigger brokerage like that is a lot of the times the people don't have as much, they don't care as much because it's not their,
it's not their company.
It's not their company, and they're just a big fish or a little fish in a big pond, and sometimes don't have as much pride in what they do, and they're ultimately their name's not the one that's on the line, and so sometimes they throw up their hands and say screw it.
Right. Well, it's hopefully it all shakes out. It sounds like it should be all right in the end here.
I think so, but stay tuned. I'm guessing as long as this one's going out, we'll probably give another update sometime in the future.
Right. Well, there's an old podcast I used to listen to. Gosh, how old am I now? Like 15 years ago. And one of their big points, this was a business podcast that talked all about how until you've got something, you've got nothing. So until that check is in your hand, right, you've got nothing.
Yeah, that's ultimately what we're all here for. And so at that point, once we get the check in the mail, then we'll know if it's resolved or not.
Yeah. All right. Well, hopefully it works out well, but maybe we want to shift then off of brokers and talk about your October financials. What do you say, Chris?
Yeah, let's move on to the good news.
All right. So tell me what the good news is.
All right, so like I mentioned at the beginning, October has been a pretty decent month. Not a crash through the ceiling, fantastic month, but pretty good nonetheless. So I'll just kind of start off going through the numbers, and again, all these numbers are going to be posted on Haulin Assets LLC haulinassets.com show notes. Just go to episode 28. October Financials is the title of it, and you'll be able to see all this information. Plus, I'll have the profit and loss statement and the balance sheet on there so that everybody can kind of track that as well and kind of see what's been going on. So anyway, total miles ran for the month 10,251, which is really kind of right in line with what's normal.
Yeah.
One of the good things that kind of helped the profitability this month is we were really low on deadhead miles, only 490 miles deadhead. So that's
so is that miles you're doing without a load?
Correct. Yeah, it's like going from one load to the next, in between loads, that kind of thing. And most, last month I think we were closer to about 10% of our miles were deadhead miles. This time less than 5%. So that's a less than half of the deadhead miles. And controlling your deadhead miles is something really important. The lower you can get, the better off you are. In fact, I think the load I'm on right now is one of the lowest deadheads I've ever had. I'm actually was like 7 miles from where I dropped off to where I'm picking up.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
It's good.
So what was your total revenue this month?
Total revenue was just under $18,000, which was actually about $3,000 less than last month. So our total revenue obviously a little bit lower, but what really matters is the bottom line is higher, and we'll kind of get to that in the end. But let me talk really quick. I guess one of the reasons that revenue was down lower, because it shouldn't have been quite as low as it was based on the number of miles. The 10,000 miles is kind of in par with where I'm usually at, somewhere between that 10 to 12,000 miles in a month. 11,000 is probably more average, or a little bit less than average. One of the biggest reasons is I referred to this and talked a little bit about this. I think it was last week's podcast, where I had one of my loads that I had been paid on from iThrive, my factoring company. The broker actually never ended up paying iThrive. So it was a $2,500 load. And when, if you remember right, when I took that load, I kind of took it against iThrive's recommendation because the broker didn't have any history. And anyway, it all fell apart and it didn't pay. And so because iThrive had warned me and said, we're only going to take it on what's called a recourse basis, meaning if this load defaults, I'm going to be on the hook for it. I was on the hook and I have to pay back that $2,500. So that's a big reason the revenue was down as much as it was. But iThrive actually kind of helped me out a little bit, because they allowed me to break that $2,500 that I had to pay back to them across a little bit of time. So I'm essentially paying half of it in October. So revenue was down about $1,250 because of that. And then
that's going to be the case again next month as well.
It is. It's going to be the case again in November, because I'm going to have to pay that back then as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And so the total revenue, now I'm trying to recall my lessons from previous episodes here, Chris. We want to take that over your mileage, right? So we get a per mile rate. And how's that per mile rate doing?
So again, it was down because and a big piece of that is because of that. Jenkins was the broker on it. Jenkins National, they're out of business, obviously. But it was down to $1.74, and a big chunk of that drop is because of that load. But let me talk a little bit about this is one of the things that having a good business partner is really important, because there's a lot of factoring companies out there that would say, okay, you've got to pay this $2,500. I've seen and talked to people, heard lots of stories where the factoring company will kind of wait in the background, and as soon as you submit another invoice that's for, say, higher than that amount, say you've got a $3,000 load, they're going to, without even telling you, take that whole $2,500 out of one load, one fell swoop, without any warning, and all of a sudden you're out of money that you're expecting to get. So that's where you want to be kind of a little bit more picky about the factoring company you choose, because some are going to be a little bit more flexible in that kind of thing. Like with iThrive, what they did with me, obviously I'm an owner of iThrive, But again, we have that relationship, and iThrive is treating me just like any other driver. And iThrive would do this and we do this all the time for other clients, where, whether it's a vehicle breakdown, a short pay on a load, or a load like this that goes bad, that ultimately the carrier is responsible for, iThrive will break that apart, let you take it over a reasonable amount of time, so it's not one big hit on your pocketbook like it happens a lot of the times.
Kind of reminds me of what you were saying an episode or two ago about transactional relationships versus long-term relationships, and this idea that, hey, give me my money right now. I don't care what your situation is. It'll get them their money right away, presumably, but it's not going to really endear them to you and make you want to stick around as a client, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, with all my businesses, we try to have that relationship, long-lasting relationship that we build, rather than the transactional relationship. And so that's the way iThrive works, is we understand what it's like being in this business, and it's hard. And, we try to partner with our clients and help them out as much as we can within reason. And if they, if something happens that makes them go out of business, it's not good for any of us. And so we try to do everything we can to help them stick around and get through some of those rough patches. This
episode of Haulin Assets is brought to you apparently by iThrive Funding. go to ithrivefunding.com.
Yeah, that was quite a plug, wasn't
it? We're shameless, Chris. Shameless.
We are shameless.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I feel like if we can work it in organically like that, people will forgive us.
I hope so. Yeah, that's kind of the point is. Again, I think I mentioned it last month that I talked a little bit about my businesses. I do have businesses in the industry, full disclosure. Everybody, I want to know that. The podcast is free material for anybody, but the one thing we would ask is you do your due diligence on business relationships you want to have, but we'd love to have a shot at it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk then. Let's get back to the financials here, Chris. And you've mentioned that your revenue was down a little bit, your miles were down a little bit, but it sounds like in order to turn a profit, because you said that this month was pretty good, your expenses must have been down a little bit too.
Yeah, expenses definitely were down, especially compared with last month. We had a bunch of repairs and things happen last month. The only one major repair we had this month was the alternator on my reefer broke down. Ooh. And I can't believe, it was not crazy. Well, I think it's crazy expensive, actually. $1,200 to repair an alternator on the reefer. I've done alternators in my car, and a couple $100, but $1,200 for a reefer. Now, with that being said, it broke down on a Saturday, so I had to pay the weekend rates, which never is a good thing.
Right.
It was kind of an interesting story, because what ended up happening was the alternator itself. It was the original alternator, and my reefer's not brand new, but the tensioner had the bolt that keeps the tensioner in place had broken, and so it put a bunch of tension onto that belt, which ultimately really quickly wore out the alternator bearing, and it caused it to seize up. Well, it seized up right outside of Kansas City, and I was literally, when the reefer signal, the reefer gives me a signal that there's some kind of issue. I pull off as soon as I can, look at it, see that it's completely shut down, and
were you carrying a refrigerated load at the time?
I was under a frozen load. I think I had the reefer temperature at 0 degrees.
Wow.
So that always kind of makes you a little bit nervous. But luckily, it was a Saturday, so you think, oh crap, they're not gonna be open, which they weren't, but they all have. Found the closest Thermal King. They all have after hours places. I call the after hours number. Lo and behold, I was less than 10 miles away. There was actually a mechanic at the shop just finishing up another job. I literally pull into the Thermal King as he's pulling the trailer out of the bay for the one that he just fixed, puts me in, and had me, although it was $1,200, had me back on the road in less than 2 hours.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. I was talking to him a little bit about, when they break down, how much time do you have before you start worrying about issues with the load. And he says it's usually about 4 to 6 hours.
Oh, that's actually a lot longer than I would have expected. Now, it is October in this story, right? So it's maybe you've got a little more time than if it were July.
Yeah, it was the beginning of October. It wasn't super hot outside, but it was decent temperatures. It was probably in the 60s or 70s or so.
All right. Well, okay. So you did have some expenses still, some unexpected expenses, but they were generally down because you weren't dealing with any wildlife trying to tackle your truck or whatever else has happened to you over the last few months.
Yeah, no, I didn't have to get towed, no tow bills, nothing like that. So yeah, it could have been worse.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so tell me about those are your unexpected expenses, but now tell me about some of the other ones that we go through. We've talked about fixed expenses and per mile expenses before, and maybe we run through a couple of those.
Yeah, the big expense that I kind of want to talk a little bit about today is fuel. All right, so fuel's kind of the biggest expense that I want to talk about today. And before we really even kind of jump into that, let's talk a little bit about expenses in general. Trucking is really a business of managing your expenses. Profit margins in the trucking industry are lower than in most industries. We've mentioned that in the past. And so more so in trucking than any other most other industries out there, it's super important that you do what you can to manage and control those expenses. So every dollar that you save is a dollar that of increased profit, and where margins are so thin in the trucking industry, it's critical that you manage those. With fuel this month, there were two things that I was able to do that really kind of help save a little bit of money. One of them is going to be actually really long term. So I was talking to a guy that owns a medium-sized trucking company that I've gotten to know over the years, and he actually has his own bulk fuel system on his property where he is able to purchase fuel kind of more at the wholesale level, fill his trucks, and it saves him obviously quite a bit of money in fuel. And the more fuel he's able to purchase, the better rate he gets on what he purchases. And so he's more than happy to let me come in, buy fuel from him at a little bit more than his cost, so he makes a little bit money at it, which still ultimately saves me, kind of depending on fuel prices at the time, anywhere from 10 to 30 cents a gallon, and I can go fuel at his facility, save myself some money, so it saves me money. He purchases more fuel, so he's able to get his fuel at an even lower price, and so it's kind of a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah,
and so now anytime I'm in Utah, which is where I fuel about 25% of the time, I'm going to get to save 10 to 30 cents a gallon, which is awesome. And which even more so on top of that is his DEF. This is what flabbergasted me. I couldn't even believe it. His DEF is half the price of what I pay for it at a retailer, which I'm only spending $150 a month in DEF, but still, I mean, that means I'm going to save $50 to $75 a month just in DEF alone. I mean, that's not insignificant.
No, that's I'd say so. And how do you know this guy? I mean, this is somebody that you just a relationship you cultivated, or an old friend of yours, or what?
Yeah, a guy that I met through the Utah Trucking Association, just with my relationship with that organization, and got to know him, and one day we started talking about fuel, and he said, "Hey, come fuel at my spot." So that's kind of another one of the lessons learned. Another tip for everybody is networking super important. There are guys like him who, he's been around for a while, and he has I think about 100 truck fleet, and he started out small, just like I did, just like probably most of our listeners did, and he understands what it's like, and he wants to do nothing more than help somebody else trying to get a good foot on the ground. And you find people like that, and it's beneficial. And so that's one of those situations where the Utah Trucking Association has been a good place to develop those relationships for me. Most states have some kind of association like that. Some of them are better than others. Utah's I think for the most part is pretty good, but to be 100% honest, I mean, I think they do a better job of working with bigger fleets than they really do the small guy, but there's still a lot of value that you can get by being part of that organization and going to some of their events, meeting other drivers, other trucking company owners, and even if they do a better job with the bigger fleets, there still is some advantage for smaller guys like us to be part of it.
Absolutely.
So the other thing with fuel, Craig, that I want to talk a little bit is about IFTA. I had an experience this week that really I think is a good way to kind of teach people about one way to save fuel on IFTA, better understanding how to purchase fuel smartly. So anyway, I started kind of really thinking about it and how to present it, and I realized, you know what, this needs to be its own podcast because it's just too much information to add on to a financials episode.
Right.
So I kind of want to give a teaser. I think this is what we're going to talk about next week, but we're going to talk a little bit about understanding IFTA and fuel taxes and how really understanding that puts you ahead of the game, because most people don't get IFTA and they don't factor IFTA and fuel taxes into their fuel purchases. And when you do, like in this situation, I saved at least 7 cents a gallon. It may have been even more like 20 cents a gallon, depending on where I purchased, because I understood IFTA and purchased fuel at a location that on the surface may not have made sense to most people.
Well, so, yeah, I mean, even if it was 7 cents a gallon, that may not sound like much to somebody who's filling up 13 gallons in a Mazda 3, but for somebody in your situation, yeah, that's not going to be insignificant, especially when you stretch it over not just this fill up, but over a week and a month and over your whole year. That's significant.
Absolutely. Even just one, it's 150 gallons a pop at 7 cents a gallon. I mean, that's more than $10 each time you fill up. That's pretty good.
Yeah. All right, Chris. Well, hit me with your bottom line then. How was the month? Give me a number.
We made just over $2,000 for the month of October, which is pretty decent.
Okay, yeah, and again, this is after you've been paid and all your expenses are all factored in and all that stuff. So $2,000 in profit for the company, not bad. Now, does that get you to where you want to be? I know you are you're like a one-note soprano when it comes to saving, right? You love saving. Did you get to do all the saving you wanted to this month?
Not as much as I would have liked, but I was able to save a little bit of money. I put $750 towards the next truck payment. So it was better, and I'll probably so far as we're recording this, we're almost halfway through November, not quite, and things have been going pretty smooth this month. So hopefully it'll stay that way, and we'll have another really good month in November and can kind of up that savings rate a little bit. But still, $2,000 in profit is not a bad month, and that's after I paid myself a little bit over $4,000 in the month of October as a driver as well. So it could have been worse.
Yeah, nice. Well, we're going to hear all about that, I presume, in about a month when we do November financials, and we'll what I'm excited for, Chris, honestly, is I'm really interested to see what your experience is out on the road during holiday season.
Yeah, that will be interesting. I still haven't really kind of made the decision if I'm going to try to be home on Thanksgiving or not. I'm trying to run pretty hard earlier in this month so that I can be home over the Thanksgiving break. We'll kind of see how that goes. Well,
the two most important things in life, Chris, you know what they are, right? The first one is family. So you got to be there for your family. I've heard. The second one is making sure that you get some sort of really nice gift for your podcast co-host for the holidays. So make sure as long as you got your priorities straight, I'm fine with whatever you decide to do out on the road.
I'll try to keep that in mind, Craig.
All right, should we call it there, Chris?
That was a shameless plug of greater proportions than I think we've seen yet on this show. But yeah, I think that's probably pretty close to being done.
Hey, you know what? It's I'd say we earned it, Chris. It's 28 episodes. We earned our shameless plugs. So
I guess you're right.
And in fact, I think we've earned it so well, I'll do one more. So go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes and previous episodes. Go to ithrivefunding.com if you want to hear more about how a good factoring company actually operates. And what else should we plug, Chris? Go to motorcarrierhq.com for tools and tips. Anything else?
I think that about covers it. Good job, Craig.
Yeah, excellent, man. I'm that was even sans notes, Chris. I'm getting pretty
You're
good
on
at this.
Fire today, Craig.
All right, Chris. I'll see you next week then.
All right, we'll see you then. I've got something in my throat. Just a second.
Oh, that's all right.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Networking's super important. There's guys like him. Man, I can't get it to stop.
Oh man, sorry about your throat. That sounded annoying.
I'm not sure what was happening because that hasn't. Maybe it's because like I sit in my truck all day long and I'm used to saying like a grand total of like maybe 100 words a day, and then all of a sudden I've got to spew out 1,000 all at once. My throat's just not used to it. You can put that on the bloopers.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
I'm ready.